College football nerds, we are here talking Bedlam. A couple of y'all requested this one, so we thought we'd get it out better late than never. We actually recorded all of our videos late this week, but we are getting around to an important game in the Big 12, and we want to talk about it. Want to remind y'all, if you haven't already, it's a new season for everybody, even though it's November. Please like and subscribe. Helps us out a lot. Hit the notification bell if you want. And Oklahoma State fans, it's been a while since we've had y'all as well. Remember, if you don't know, or if you're new, or just getting back with us, we are nerdy. We do talk numbers. We are going to get into a model, but we also talk matchups. We also talk the game. So we're not just what our name says, college football nerds. We are a little more of a 360 view of the game. All right, Josh, we had an extended discussion about this game before we hit record, and coming into that discussion, I was really feeling like Oklahoma is poised to run away with this. You might have been as well. But then we started digging into it, and we looked at the spread, which we don't normally look at Vegas, but it's going, we're getting into Wednesday, and so at least those lines are a little bit settled. We saw something interesting. It opened at 8.5. It got bought down to 7 pretty quick, 8.5 that Oklahoma was giving up. And then we started looking at the matchups. And I think that at first glance, this does feel like a game that Oklahoma really could run away with. But then what we saw when we started talking about it with these matchups brings things kind of back to the middle. I want you to unpack that a little bit, break that down, while we both sort of had our opinions changed after we talked through this.
I think there's really two things that are important to note with these teams. The first thing is Oklahoma State is the best pass defense in the Big 12. They're allowing 5.6 yards per attempt. We have some intermediary statistics that we run a model. We'll talk about the scoring projection later on, but it gives you an idea of percentage of opponent averages allowed. Oklahoma State only allows 79% of opponent averages. We generally say anything under 80% is elite. And this year in particular, where there's not a lot of garbage time teams thrown in to boost your numbers, it's particularly good. What I thought was also interesting, though, in that is that Oklahoma only allows 80% of opponent rushing averages. So Oklahoma, which we've seen be really spectacularly bad, to be frank, the past few years, like 120% of opponent averages or higher run and pass. They're bad on pass, 115% allowed there, but 80% against the run. That's actually pretty darn good. Oklahoma State's about 90% against the run. You end up with a situation where you've got the best pass defense in the Big 12, playing a team that is weak against the pass, but actually strong against the run. And you've got a situation where Oklahoma is not as dominant running the ball as they have been. They are not a 4.5 yard per carry team, whereas in past years they've been a 6 or 7 yard per carry team in a lot of their better offenses, and I think Big 12 fans understand that. It was the run game at Oklahoma that broke everything open, because if you can't stop someone from getting 6 or 7 yards per carry, you're not going to win the ball game. And then, on the other side of the ball, Oklahoma State is definitely a run-first team. Chuba Hubbard is the focus of the offense. And when they've been good, it's been Hubbard that's carried the day. And when Hubbard's been stymied, Spencer Sanders has been effective, but not effective enough. The example I'd give was the Texas game. Chuba Hubbard ended up with 25 carries for 2.9 yards per attempt, and Texas was clearly not going to let him win the game. They put it on Sanders. Now, Sanders ended up with 39 attempts for 400 yards, which is pretty good statistically on its own, 4 touchdowns and 1 interception, but I think there's some hidden stats there. Like Sanders ended up with 16 carries in the game for 0.7 yards. So when you take into account how many sacks and whatnot he had, it was a little less than 7.5 yards per play generated throwing. That wasn't enough, obviously, to win the game, especially with a number of fumbles. That's, to me, what sort of throws this in the middle. You have an Oklahoma defense that is probably a lot better against the run than people realize, and I'm just saying purely statistically. You have an Oklahoma State team that really needs to run the ball to be good offensively. They've not been a great offensive team. They've been a good offensive team with a really good pass defense. So both teams are sort of playing strength on strength, or I should say key on strength. Oklahoma's passing game with Rattler is playing the best pass defense. Oklahoma State is playing actually a pretty good run defense, it's going to keep scoring down. And I'll make one point and then I'll let you sort of elaborate on it. I think the key here really is Rattler. When Oklahoma played Kansas State, the thing that Kansas State sort of set out in the second half of that game is if you contain Rattler in the pocket, he's not terribly comfortable. When you look at him statistically throughout the season, he's been completely up and down. He's had games where he was 17 yards per attempt or 15 yards per attempt, and he's had games where he was 6 yards per attempt or 7.9. And I think a lot of it just has to do with whether you can keep him in the pocket, not let him do rollouts and bootlegs where he can use his really incredible arm talent and arm angles to make great throws, and instead you make him sit and make reads. If Oklahoma State can do that, they keep Oklahoma in check. And if Oklahoma keeps Hubbard in check, then their offense isn't going to be good. And, regardless, I think you end up with a low-scoring game.
I do think it's lower scoring than maybe these fan bases are used to in this series, but Oklahoma State fans more used to this year. Your point about Rattler is fair, and OU fans may not want to hear this because he has had some games where he put up some numbers. I was a little surprised to see a lot of OU fans were really excited after the Kansas game, and I think there's a little fool's gold there where they blew out Texas Tech, still gave up I think 28 points, and there was no Bowman, which is you can't that's a horrible defense with a great quarterback whose quarterback didn't really play. I think he started the game 4 for 4 and then didn't play. So that's a little fool's gold. And then, you ran it up on Kansas. Kansas is historically terrible. In the past, when we've talked about how Rutgers was FCS quality, Kansas is FCS, mid-level FCS quality this year. So Oklahoma should drill them. My concern was Spencer Rattler, 15 to 27 in that game for 212 yards, 7.9 per. Now, I don't think you can completely kill Rattler for this game because we've seen this with teams with really good offenses. What do in games where they know they're going to win? They go and work on stuff that they know they're bad at. Nick Saban is notorious for this, where he'll beat a Florida or a Georgia by 30 points and then the next week struggle with Colorado State, beat them by 32 to 9 because they're working on things because they know they got it in the bag. So not too much you can take good or bad from that, but you're right. Rattler, not just in game-to-game inconsistent, he's inconsistent within a game where you'll see him make plays where you're like, oh my God, give the guy the Heisman right now, and then he'll kill a drive. And that's a little bit concerning to me. But on the flip side, I'm worried about how Oklahoma State's going to get their points, Josh. I mean, it's one thing to be inconsistent at quarterback. It's another to play right into Oklahoma's hands in that you can't attack them with the one thing defensively that they're not great at. Talk a little bit about how much do you view this game kind of as a microcosm of what we've said about college football as a whole this year, where we're to the point now where you live and die as a team by what you can do at quarterback.
And to be clear, I mean, Oklahoma State is, I think, third in the conference in yards per attempt. So it's not like statistically they're poor, but they're that way despite the fact that teams are keying heavily on Hubbard. They're attacking the line of scrimmage at the snap. They're not going to let Hubbard beat them because Hubbard is, and we've been, by the way, if you haven't followed us, Daniel has been in love with Hubbard for like 3 years now. We do believe that he's absolutely one of the best backs in college football, but he can't do it by himself. And, to the point Daniel is making, we see all the time in our model, teams with opponent rushing averages, elite defenses can get to the 50 to 60% range. You can hold a team to half their, and we're talking, by the way, per play yardage, not total yardage. Total yardage is dependent on tempo. We're saying snap to snap, you can hold a team to half their rushing averages if you're elite defense consistently. But you can't shut down a pass game. About the best we ever see against the pass is around 75%. In Oklahoma State this year is at 79. But you really can't shut down a pass game. You can hold it a little bit in check, but they're still going to get theirs. And we see this every year in the playoff, right? Clemson has ETN, and ETN gets them to the playoff every year undefeated, or at least past few years undefeated. He is the absolute key to that. Every game you look at where they're struggling, they're struggling with Syracuse or what have you, it is ETN that comes in, and it's ETN running the ball or catching it on short passes that blows that game open. Because the run game is consistent, and the run game will be what beats an inferior team that can't seal the edges and stay with you in terms of speed. Passing games are inconsistent, but they're much more effective against elite defenses. So when you're playing a team that has a hot top-end offense, that high-end offense team, and we've seen this from Oklahoma, can lay an egg. They can have a large number of interceptions. They can have a game where the quarterback's just off, and it can sputter. But if that, but that's kind of an odd thing, and it's going to be like a 1-8 scenario where you lose a random game to a random team. But in a playoff-ish scenario where you're playing a really big team, most of the time that doesn't happen. And so you've got to be able to match their scoring production, because it doesn't matter if you're, 2016 Alabama, one of the best defenses in the past couple decades, still gave up buckets of points to Clemson by the end of the day because they had Deshaun Watson. And I think that's the problem for Oklahoma State. They're trying to rely on their quarterback because they're keying on the run game, but they're doing it week to week, and it's a lot to ask a quarterback to do that, and it's even more to ask a quarterback to do it when you're playing an Oklahoma team that, despite all their struggles, is still a very good team that is still a yard and a half per play better passing the ball than anybody else in the Big 12, and they're going to score a lot of points.
All right, so I'm going to give my score prediction and then have you get into the model and give your score prediction. Initially, I was thinking like 40-20, given, just kind of casually my thoughts about Oklahoma's offense and the lack of offense. You say statistically they're not great. I think Oklahoma State's offense is poor. I think their defense is excellent, especially considering they have faced some good offenses. I think their offense is poor. They could have lost Kansas State 21-20. They could have lost to Tulsa 17-16. 27 points on West Virginia is not a great deal. I still think their defense is that good. And I think that if you look at the common opponents, Texas, Kansas State, Iowa State, Oklahoma State's performed better against all three of those teams than did Oklahoma, except for Texas. I mean, that game was weird, though, because they dominated that game. It was something like 500 yards to 280 yards, but they had 4 turnovers, 3 of which were fumbles. Those are random, not really, repeatable. So I think give me 27-24 Oklahoma, and I would not be surprised at all if Oklahoma State won this game. Let's see what the model says, and then give me your score prediction off of that.
So our model is a per play model, and it's entirely relational. We look at how you did against your opponents, how they did against everyone else, get an idea of how strong your team is, respectively. Look at the matchups to guess production, and then based off the production, we look at your own scoring, each team individually, and then it has a self-learning model where it predicts your scoring based off your production, based off what mattered to your individual team in the past. The reality of that in this game is that it's predicting from a production sense. Neither team's going to run the ball particularly well, but Oklahoma State really not well. Only about 3.1 yards per carry for Oklahoma State, 3.7 for Oklahoma. Oklahoma State is expected to pass it better per play at 9.4 yards per attempt to 7.2, but this is where volume comes into play. Oklahoma runs and passes right at 50%. Oklahoma State runs the ball 50% more than it passes. So even though Oklahoma State in a per play sense is more effective as a passing team, they are much more dependent on the run, and that's something that our model sees. So it says Oklahoma State per play will outgain Oklahoma about 5.6 yards per play to 5.4, but it has Oklahoma winning by a considerable margin, 41 points to 29. Now that margin of 12 points is not all that far off from the spread. It's within a touchdown. Within a touchdown can be a lot, but realize it's still 5 points off, whatever. I think where the model's off, though, is really inflating the scoring. I think the matchups and the reality of it are going to create a scaling issue in this game. for the reasons we already talked about. I think Oklahoma's scoring is a little bit inflated due to the sort of the Texas game being Texas Tech game being a runaway, in the Kansas game just playing Kansas. I think it is going to be lower scoring. I'm going to say I would say 34-27 rather than 41-29. That's right at the 7-point line. We don't really pick against the spread per se. We just make our own picks, and then we sometimes talk about the spread after. I will say that with both of us, like 34-27, 7-point differential, that's a game predicted to be 61 points. We're right around the over-under in the margin here. So I don't think either one of us, if you're angry at us, neither one of us is saying anything off from Vegas. This is predicted to be exactly the kind of game that we're saying we think it will be based off the matchups. Our model disagrees and thinks it's going to be a higher scoring game, and most people think it's going to be higher scoring. But what we're flagging for you is there's a lot of reasons to think this is going to be a much lower scoring game than it's predicted. It will not shock me if it's lower scoring. I think the spread personally is accurate, and I'm curious if you agree with this. I think the spread is accurate from Vegas, but I think this is a trap game in the over/under. I think there's a lot of signs that a 59-point over/under is low for the expectations, I think, with these two teams. And it might, and given the fact that it is so low and so many people are picking the over, I think I saw where it was 80% or more were picking the over. I have a feeling Vegas thinks this is actually going to be less than 59, and they're kind of setting people up to fail.
I think it's hard. I mean, Vegas knows what they're doing better than most. And like what you're talking about is true. Like Vegas isn't just predicting, while they do a pretty good job of predicting the score or the spread, they're also predicting human nature, and they're pretty good at that as well. And this is the kind of game where they could do that, especially given the history on this series, which we're used to being offensively crazy. I wonder, in your opinion, if one team runs away with this game, which team is it and why?
I think if a team runs away, it almost has to be Oklahoma. Oklahoma State, I just don't see them being equipped to, score in buckets on any high-level team. I mean, 16. When you look at games since Spencer Sanders played in, right? Tulsa didn't really play much, but 24 points against Iowa State, 34 points against Texas, 20 points against Kansas State. It's not been a ton of production. The one game where there was a lot of points was Kansas, and they're, like you said, it's you almost have to throw it out because they're so bad. I just don't see them. I mean, given how Oklahoma's defense is played, and you got to be fair and you got to be realistic. The defense has collapsed in games, so it's possible. But I don't think they're that bad this year. I think they're actually maybe a little bit over-aligned for games where the offense actually turned the ball over a lot and sputtered a lot and couldn't put it away. I think Oklahoma, though, with their passing attack, is capable, when Rattler is on, of destroying someone. They're just inconsistent. And I guess that'll lead me with the last point I want to make on Oklahoma. A lot of this is about Oklahoma and their identity this year. And the reality is the defense is improved. And I'm telling you, statistically, they're significantly improved. Significantly so from past few seasons. And this is actually a good run defense. The problem is the offense was so otherworldly that it really hid all the warts before. And everybody knew that, but it's one thing to know it, and it's another to accept it. This year, the defense, while greatly improved, is still not great. And the offense is inconsistent. So when the offense has a bad day, those defensive deficiencies really show their head in a way that got covered up in the past. And that's the problem with Oklahoma, and it's the problem with predicting them. You don't know what team's going to come out the tunnel in a given week. They're going to lose games they shouldn't. We said this in another segment talking about top 10 teams. I felt like Oklahoma could give a lot of top 5 teams a better game than like Georgia, who I have Georgia in my top 10, but I think they're not good enough offensively to be able to beat a Florida or an Alabama. They could play them over and over again, and it's not going to happen. Oklahoma could play them 10 times and win 2 or 3 of them. But the problem is that Georgia's going to pretty consistently beat bad teams, and Oklahoma's just not going to be able to do it, given their inconsistency and the poor defense.
You're right, though. It's weird for us, and we have to recalibrate how we look at Oklahoma to see them play really good defense. What I think what I like about it, though, is look, we're talking about Lincoln Riley. He's going to get the offense locked in at some point. He's going to get enough of a nucleus of plays that he can run with Spencer Rattler that he's comfortable with, and it's going to happen. It's going to click at some point. It may not be this year. What I think for Oklahoma fans, why they should be encouraged is you're still winning games and you're not having to win them 57-53. That's the thing that spells what they need for the future, because they know they can get offense. But what has kept them from getting over the hump and winning a playoff game is that they've had all the offense in the world and no defense. They just needed a little bit of defense. This defense right here is good enough to win some of those games, even the ones they got blown out in previous years. So that's encouraging to me. I think that's it for us on this one. You got anything else?
No, that's it for me.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much for hanging with us this long. Have a great week. God bless.